So, welcome to the ramp. My name is Monty Garlic, and I'm known as a colorblind army guy. Um, I failed to explain last time where the nickname colorblind army guy came from. Um, we met some people when we were stationed in Germany, and we're still friends with this family, but it's been 30 plus years ago that we first met them, and they had some little children then. And I was coloring with two of the little girls of this family and colored a duck, some weird colors. And one of the little girls said, "Well, that's not what colored ducks are." And I said, "Yeah, I know. I'm colorblind." Well, fast forward to just about 4 months ago. That girl is obviously grown now and has a family and is doing her own podcast. And she had me on her podcast. And we talked about my military time and my PTSD and some other things. But when she sent me a copy of that, she titled that particular episode "The Colorblind Army Guy" and told me that it wasn't only maybe 7, maybe 10 years ago that her and her family realized that I wasn't really colorblind. That I just said that time when we were coloring just as a joke. But anyway, that's where the name colorblind army guy comes from. And just to reiterate, the reason why we call our podcast the ramp is because the ramp on the back of our Bradley fighting vehicle was a place where we sat around and talked a lot about different things. And in my therapy, dealing with my PTSD, I've learned that talking about my issues has helped me more than almost anything. Not being afraid of talking about things, to admit to myself, especially, that I have PTSD, that I need to deal with PTSD, and that I can't be afraid of other people knowing that this is an issue I'm dealing with. And so the ramp being the metaphor of us having a place to talk and to try and start to heal in our issues with PTSD. Um, this morning, we're going to just talk back and forth. I have my producer here, Greg Skinner, and him and I go way back in the military. We were stationed together, and he was my Bradley driver for a time. And we have similar experiences. Our PTSD experiences weren't together, they were in different units. But we're going to kind of talk a little bit about our experiences, maybe not specific experiences, but how we came to the conclusion that we have PTSD and what it was doing to us and what we needed to do to try and help ourselves and our families. So, Greg, I'll let you go ahead and start if you want to. Just kind of tell us, when maybe you first realized you had some issues with PTSD and what you did to try and get some help for that.
Hi, I'm Greg Skinner. I was Monty's driver, and now I'm his producer. Thanks, buddy. Yeah, I don't know. I think I'm trying to think. I think that I realized, or I thought I had PTSD long before it was affecting my life negatively. So I think probably it's in university. So 97, 98. So what's that, 6, 7 years later? I was having some dreams and stuff. And, but I don't think that's really PTSD. I think that's dreams. So I think it took some time for it to develop. But I began to see, I'm looking and thinking impatiently, and I'm beginning to see right now that perhaps by my junior, senior year in university, some of the things that would become traditional for me started to show up. And that's when I was seeing ethical violations around me. And I do think, I think that's the beginning, because that's sort of my most profound. And what am I thinking? In 2000, I wound up with a therapist at my university. And that's where the little girl, right? That's where my ultimate PTSD fantasy came true. I'm so sorry that I forgot that was part of it. Yeah. So 97, I start to behave. By 2000, I'm in therapy.
Well,
Yeah.
that's, my wife actually is the one that was trying to convince me that I had issues with PTSD. And looking back on my issues, I think we were both in the Desert Shield, Desert Storm conflict, and I, looking back on the rest of my career, because I retired from the service in 2001, the beginning of 2001, that I was having issues with PTSD back then. But I didn't really know it or didn't want to admit it. I was looking back on that, I can tell that I was angry a lot, that I was pushing my family away, that I was spending more time away from them. After I retired, we moved back to Idaho, and I got horses and was training horses and doing some roping and stuff. And I spent a lot of time away from my family just doing that. And in my research of PTSD and the signs that we should look for, those were all part of it. And I just didn't realize it. But then, like Greg talks about, I started having some dreams and nightmares and things that would bring me awake, and I would wake up, wanting to fight. I hit my wife a couple of times during the night in her sleep, and I punched a hole in our wall in the bedroom one time, and it finally got to a point where my wife said, "You need to go get some help." So I dealt with my issues, I would say, for probably 20 years before I finally went to get some help. The last few years of my career, and then after I retired, probably 15 years after I retired. So it was, 2014 or 15 when I finally went to the VA and started getting some help. So yeah, it's a hard thing now that I look back on that. It's hard to deal with when you're not getting help or you don't have some kind of support to help you deal with it. It can be a hard thing, not only on yourself, but on those around you, your family and your friends and that kind of stuff. So
Yeah, it's it is that. So, I moved around so much that I didn't I didn't have that, right? The consistency. There was a relationship after the army, then another one, and then married, divorced, and now I'm in a good place and in a good relationship. But also throughout that, I'm university, working 2-3 years here, working 2-3 years there, moving around with my career, and so while I did start therapy in 2000, that ended, and there's fits and starts along the way. But eventually in 2009, even before the baby came, I walked into a VA in Seattle, and this is a bit of a realization, and I walked in and said, I don't want to be a warrior anymore, right? I mean, literally. I don't want to be a warrior anymore. What can we do? Like, how do we get this out? I'm done, because that's what my career had become, and is the same game, without the violence, but going up against a constant perceived threat, tangling through it, and so for me, my work was triggering my PTSD just every single day to some way or another, and not realizing, in a lot of ways, I suppose, that I was drawing myself to it, right? The stress and the intellectual combat of my career as a journalist with public officials. Yeah, and I walked in and I was like, I don't want to be a warrior anymore. It's 11 years later, and it's only been the last 2 years that I feel like I've really moved on from that lad, the warrior. So just supporting that, however you can come to it. I had to walk in myself, but you had the consistent long life with your wife and the love of her to get you to go in, however we get in, and fits and starts. For me, fits and starts over 20 years before I think I really wanted to deal, or could, I don't know. That's too hard to say.
Yeah, I think that's one of the big things for a lot of us that deal with PTSD is that we, for whatever reason, either don't want to admit it, or we're afraid to admit it, or whatever it might be. You say you got to a point where you didn't want to be that warrior anymore, and that PTSD can be not only emotionally but physically draining on you, trying to, I mean, if you've got that hypervigilance in your system all the time, and you're always looking around and thinking that something is going to go wrong, and it's not only emotionally but physically draining on your body. And so it can get to a point where you just get tired and you need to figure out a way to try and help yourself and to try and fix those things. I know that there's a lot of. Go ahead, Greg.
Quick question. Have you, do you know this, taste the metal? Can you taste the metal in your mouth back in the day at all? I used to get like this metal taste in my mouth from the stress of what I think was responding to the PTSD. And I can remember that same taste in my mouth during combat. And I believe it's the cortisol going with the adrenaline. And I have since learned that will kill us, So it is physically draining, physically dangerous. Did you ever taste that metal?
I haven't personally. I have heard that story before, but I have not experienced that personally, no. I know that there's lots of stories out there about how horrible the VAs are, and not to go to the VAs for help, and you won't get any help from them if you go in there. And I'm sure there are a lot of VAs out there that that fit those stories. But I have to say that there are VAs out there that don't. The VAs that I've been to have been very helpful for me. They're more than willing to try and, get you in as soon as they can, and to get you matched up with the therapist that fits you. And so, to throw a blanket over all VAs saying they're all worthless, I just hesitate to do that, because I just don't believe that. Um, just because of my experience. Now, I'm not going to try and convince someone else that's had bad experiences at the VA that those bad experiences aren't the norm, because in some VAs they are. And I think the VA system is, I'm not sure if it's broken, it's just overwhelmed. They have more patients than they can deal with, and they don't have the staffing that they need to deal with those patients. And so I would just say, you know if you're not having good luck with the VA, go to your local mental health facilities. And if you've been diagnosed with PTSD through the military and you have that disability, the VA will pay for that, or the military will. Well, I should say they're supposed to. Um, Sometimes we fight that battle as well. But I guess just recognizing those symptoms and those things that are kind of out of place in our lives. If you've had family members or friends that say, why are you so angry, or why don't you want to come out and do things with us? Why this, why that? Those can be, those symptoms of that PTSD, and can be, the reasons that we should go in and try and get some help for ourselves. Um, I hesitate yet to talk specifically about instances that happened to me, because uh, they just get to me too much still. Um, so I talk more about just the fact that I am a sufferer of PTSD, and that these are the things that I have to deal with, whether it be depression or anxiety, hypervigilance, that kind of stuff. Those are the things that I talk about, and the things that I admit to myself that I have, because of PTSD. And so maybe we'll get to a point, maybe Greg is more comfortable talking about his specific instances. I'm not sure that that's something we want to delve into today, but what are your
I'll get
thoughts,
into it
Greg?
any day you want. I'm No, I'm just very comfortable talking about it for my own, and I always have been. Not the real. I've always been comfortable talking about the incidents, but I'm not as comfortable talking about what they did to me. right? Because it took me years to figure out what it did to me. I mean, I'm comfortable talking about it now, but I only really understand in these last 2-3 years, because of this wonderful relationship I have with my soon-to-be wife, you know, her pushing and prodding and encouraging and helping me get all the resources to really get into and figure it out and deal with it on a really deep level that I had never gotten to before. And it's in that I even understand better, you know, how those specific incidents, you know, and what we're talking about, of course, is our incidents in the military, what they did, you know, what they did to me, because, you know, I've got 30 years of response to them, you know, and some of it great and some of it not so great in terms of dealing with it. Yeah, and so, you know, like one of the things, since we knew that we got a little derailed this morning and we were going to talk about the PTSD, I did write down a note of about three things, well, four things that I could wrap my military PTSD around. And it's, you know, I'd be happy to throw a little bit of it out here and we can see what sticks, or we can save it for another time. Your preference.
No, go ahead.
So, and these are the things, I mean, these are things specifically that affected me as a civilian, you know, I got out in 1994, you know, and so that's part of what I think is interesting is your PTSD track and mine are slightly different because I left service long before you did. But one for me is my liberty, my freedom. Anybody threatens my freedom and, you know, and here it comes. It's, you know, I'm just not real comfortable. And that comes from, you know, primarily from the fact that we did not have free will, even though I tried to exercise mine constantly. We were, our job was to do as we were told as a tool, you know, and that did have an effect on me because somehow I managed to show up for that and to give up one's freedom of choice and to engage, you know, as I've said many times, you know, I don't know about you, but I attacked a foreign army, right? And I did that as a tool in my free choice. I think another trigger for me is Sergeant Mack, you know, who you know from a long time ago. It's the sergeant I had when I first got to Germany, who had it out for me from the beginning. And that ties into my sense of liberty and bullying, right? This guy was an E7 platoon sergeant, and he just came at me from day one. And me being who I am, you know, I never caved in, you know, and for months and months, he would just come in and make me take everything out of my room and one at a time, clean with a toothbrush and put it all back into some basic training stuff. And one day he said I had to stay within 12 inches of him at all time, you know. And this is a guy who put people in jail for nothing. I mean, he did. He had a guy in Mannheim, said he attacked him with a broom. The guy did not attack him. And one day, I needed to go home and sell my house. I had inherited a house from my mother. And Sergeant Mack has to sign the paperwork, and he said no. And, oh, okay. So I went to the sergeant. I got to go sell my house. You can't stop. You know, there's no good reason for stopping me to go do this. You know, I understood the regulations or whatever because of being a smart ass private. And he signed it, and Italian signed it, and off I went. But when I came back, Sergeant Mack, you know, we circled the pool table in the game room for about 5 minutes. It's, you know, I kept the pool table between us. I believe he was coming at me. You know, so that wasn't great because this guy could lock me up, beat me up, whatever, but he had me by the short hairs. And I think that left you know, plus he's supposed to be somebody I can trust and look up to. He's supposed to be platoon daddy, right? So you know, that was a fairly abusive sitch when I look
Yeah.
back, but I never would have admitted it in the service, you know. And then there's combat, of course, and that's for the non-military people. I think that's what they're interested in sometimes. And that's pretty simple. Three things, three close calls. As we discussed in our last episode, a lot of PTSD for soldiers throughout history and through time can be summed up by close calls, you know, experiences with mortality. And for me was during our first attack outside of El Basai. I don't remember what day it was, but an RPG launched from a ground troop just right past my my hatch. You know, and that was close, and that scared the shit out of me, and that's never left. Sometime later, I was driving along. We were in, I believe, active combat or had just finished. And Sergeant Daly, the dismount team leader, called up over the comms and was like, great job. Great job, Skinner. And I said, what? He said, what do you know, whatever, what are you talking about? And I said, he said, you did a great job weaving through all those mines. And I had not realized that I was in a minefield.
Oh, you're kidding.
I had not realized that I was in a minefield at all. And it was just weaving because we were in active combat, and, you know, and it was just pure luck. So that never left me. And then shortly after that, I jumped off the front of the Bradley fighting vehicle. You know, it's this big vehicle. It's about a 3-foot drop to the ground when you jump off the front, which is how I exit. You know, up the hatch, climb down the front, jump off, and I landed on the ground, and I looked between my feet, and there was a cluster bomb.
Oh my heck.
And that's a pretty close call. And so, you know, it's from, in terms of the, you know, so those things never left me. And I think the result of over the time, you know, over the 20 years is paying attention. It's that, man, if I make a mistake, I just tear myself a new one. And so while there's the hyper alertness, you know, there's my sense of liberty. I don't like people telling me what to do because some of the decisions that were made in the service. But perhaps the worst one is how hard I can be on myself for making mistakes, because, you know, those things those were in my mind, well, the RPG, you know, whatever, none of them are my fault, but they all feel like mistakes, and, you know, and half an inch one way or another, you know. So yeah, I mean, there's other stuff, but we can save it for the other day. And I think those things mostly influence my PTSD, and then how that translated out into the world. If I may just add one more thing, because I don't know, I covered it last time, was that, you know, I'm more than anxious. I get anxiety. I don't get depression too much. But one of the reasons I asked not to be a warrior anymore is because my anxious response to PTSD is to a perceived threat. And, you know, I'm an infantryman still to this day, all these years later, and we respond to a threat in a certain way, which is to attack it. And there are emotional carcasses all across America from, you know, my verbal attacks and intellectual games, and which are responses. Yeah, and I look back at those, and, you know, I don't have a lot of regrets in life, but I probably regret those for sure. You know, grown men crying. You know, that's all I can say. Grown men crying. From, you know, not from getting together and talking about PTSD, which is a reasonable thing, but from me being mean. You know? Yeah.
Well, I know that through some of my research and study, I've learned that you can end up with PTSD simply because of those close calls, and we talked a little bit about that, like you said last time. And, you know, you don't have to experience someone dying in front of you or someone getting blown up or anything like that. It could be just as simple as, like you said, jumping down off the front of your Bradley and looking down and seeing a cluster bomb at your feet. I mean, those kind of things are, to our brain, are traumatic. Because, you know, like you say, I mean, this is kind of a metaphor for everything that we experience, but, you know, 6 or 7 inches one way or the other, and we're not here to talk about this stuff. And,
Yeah.
you know, you think about those things. I know sometimes I think about those things every day for months at a time. And sometimes it gives me that survivor guilt because I know, you know, there are some guys that I knew in the service that aren't here to talk about those things. And, you know, it's it's a hard thing to deal with, a hard thing to admit that you need to deal with it. Um, and, you know, there's things out there that, I mean, we could have gone through things in our military careers that would cause PTSD in our brains, and we just don't know it because it wasn't blood and guts, so to speak, you know. Um, but yeah, I have lots of close calls like that as well. Not right at my feet like you had. And I didn't have, you know, an RPG whiz by the top of my head or anything, but you know, I had my first taste of the war over there was Scud missiles being blown out of the sky by the Patriots right over our heads, and that's when, you know, that was the first time, even though I'd been over there in that country for, you know, 3 or 4 months before that happened. You know, you don't realize that you're gonna actually go into combat now until those bullets start flying. And you know, that made me realize that I was actually in combat now. And there were other instances where, you know, buildings got blown up after this was after the war, but places I'd been where buildings got blown up by truck bombs and that kind of stuff, and people I knew got killed in those things. And uh, you know, it's those kind of things that just kind of weigh on you so much because you think, you know, why did it happen to them? Why couldn't it have happened to me? But, you know, it's like I've heard a lot of people say, you know, you ask yourselves a lot of times, why was I left behind? Well, why not you? Why did it, you know, why should it have been you? And I think that's something we need to ask ourselves too, that, you know, yeah, we feel bad for
Well, may I add?
sure.
It gets towards the why, you know, and it's the tour that you and I were on together, 1992, 93, the winter, spring. We're in Saudi Arabia, my second tour, I believe your second tour, in the zone, so to speak.
Yeah.
We're guarding an Air Force situation, Kobar Towers. The Army's in charge of the scenario. And we didn't allow people we had a square compound with tall, like 7 to 13 story tall buildings all the way around the outside that we had unoccupied. Under our plan, they were unoccupied. They were blast walls. Live in them because we knew the threat to the truck bombs. And that's part of what we did every day, you know. And that's pretty intense, walking out to those trucks and saying, hey, please go away, you know, go on. And then after we were returned home, it was about 2.5 years, maybe, that a truck bomb parked in the street in front of one of those buildings and blew the front of it off and injured 300 and killed 29.
Yeah.
I believe, something like that.
Something like that.
You know, and if we get it to why in that particular situation, you know, so that's pretty close and personal to me. I mean, there's a gap in there, but we were there protecting that place, and then we weren't there anymore, and it got blown up. And, you know, there is an analytical reason why. And it was a lapse in security. The Air Force had taken, you know, I did a little research on this years later. The Air Force had taken over their security and chose to put people in those buildings. And when those buildings got blown up, those people died, but it was their chain of command. You know, that's why. And that's it. There's no other, you know, there's just not, in that game, in that job that we had, there's just not much more to it than that.
Yeah.
And we get caught up in that bigger question. And I think that's, you know, that's when we got to go to group therapy.
Yeah.
If we're spending too much time on the question, right? You know, the why. Because during, you know, we're not caught up in the why, you know. And perhaps after we shouldn't either. But also perhaps they should help us get there without taking 10 years before we drag ourselves into the VA, you know.
You know, and that's a good point. I've never even thought about it before, but you bring up a good point. You know, we don't consider the why while we're involved in it. So why should we consider the why after it's all over? You know, I mean, there are why questions that we do have answers to, but, you know, why someone ends up dead or maimed or whatever it might be instead of us is not one of those why questions we can answer. And that's a good point. I've never thought about that before, about we don't ask why going in, why should we ask why coming out? And that's
Well,
good.
it's imponderable.
Yeah.
That's my future wife's good Buddhist training. She's exposed me to a lot of different thinkings and methods. And one of them is you only create suffering for yourself if you get hung up on imponderables. You know, we cannot answer that question. Why? It's too big. You know, I simplified it by saying our chain of command, and because we were enlisted guys, you know, that was the reality for us. We did not have free will. We do what we're told. To a high level, we do it well. And so it may not be a reasonable overlay, you know, for the commander in chief to not ponder why, but definitely for the enlisted man, it's we cannot answer that question.
Yeah. Well, we've talked about a few different things today, and I think again something that we forgot to do, Greg, we've talked about this before, is our buddy checks. We want to make sure that when people are listening or taking part in our discussions here, that we're having our buddy checks, making sure people are okay, and that we're not, you know, triggering anybody. So we want to do that. I hope this hasn't brought up anything uncomfortable for you, Greg. I know it hasn't for me. It's good for me regardless of how long or short I talk about my issues. It's always good therapy for me to just talk about it. So um, I hope it's been the same for you.
Um, yeah, I'm good to go. I got no issues. Thanks for remembering to do the buddy check. And you are good?
I am. Yep, I'm good.
Yeah. Yes, this is good. And I specifically, you know, I had a little PTSD episode on a kid on the side of a mountain last week, and I checked in with my therapist over it. And in the process of dealing with that, you know, I told him what you and I were up to, and he thought this was a good healing practice for everyone involved. So I agree. Talking about it, given that we're both in a good place to talk about it, we're going to look after each other. This may not be, you know, we'll have to learn as we go. It may not be the safest place for everyone to talk, you know. We'll have to be open to figuring that out.
Yeah.
Because of course we don't want to do any harm.
That's right. We don't want to make things worse for people. Our objective here is to try and help people and give ideas and resources. And you know, I'm not going to claim to have solutions for anybody but me. I will tell you what has worked for me and solutions that have worked for me. And I'm sure Greg is the same way. You know, we'll talk about things that have worked for us, but we will not claim that anything specifically will work for whoever is listening or participating in our discussions here. So, but having said that, we still don't want people to be triggered by what we talk about or what we say as well. And along those lines, too, I forgot to mention this on our last podcast. We do have a Facebook page. It's called The Colorblind Army Guy, where we are going to post these podcasts. And we are going to have references on that Facebook page to things that we've talked about as well. We also have a YouTube channel that is called The Colorblind Army Guy. And we're going to post our podcasts on that YouTube channel. We have a email address, thecolorblindarmyguy@gmail.com. Thecolorblindarmyguy@gmail.com. There's no capitals, no spaces in between the Colorblind Army Guy. It's all one word. So if you have questions, issues that you'd like us to talk about, we don't have to give your name if you don't want us to, but we would like to know what your concerns are, what your issues are, if you need help, if we can help you find that help, anything that we can do to help, just let us know in those emails. And I'll let Greg talk a little bit about a website that we're going to try and get up. Are you still working on that, Greg? Sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
That's okay. I'm not on the spot. Yes, we will have a website, which, you know, web real estate, the website will most likely be theramp.com or .org or whichever's available. And, you know, that'll be just a place to go for information, the list of podcasts. Of course, you'll be able to download the podcast there. We'll have it available and easier, but it'll have the same resources as Facebook without the need for you to go to Facebook. Instead of, you know, I don't use Facebook. I'm against Facebook. I think Facebook is, you know, anti-American, and And so, we will explore our differences on how to reach out. And so the website will, will just sort of be the website version of what is available through the Facebook, slightly more static.
Okay. I have some of the same feelings about Facebook that you do, but I thought it was a good place for us to reach out to people. And I belong to a PTSD group on Facebook that I've sent a message out to notify them of our podcast. And I've already got 4 people that have gone to our Facebook page and are anxious about seeing our podcast. So,
You're
yeah,
right.
it was just a place
the
to reach
unfortunate
out.
necessity, yeah, since my leaving Facebook, I'm actually penalized because so much is available only through there. And so I'm glad that you're still participating, because so many of the people that we'll want to connect with, that's how they'll be connected. I'm glad you're able to do it. I just stepped out so many years ago that unless it's absolutely necessary, I'll just keep it to the webpage.
Yeah.
We'll figure that out.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll figure that out.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think we'll go ahead and end our episode today. I think we talked about some great things, things that people can use to help themselves. They can realize that they're not alone out there, and that we all have similar experiences, which has caused our PTSD, and I hope it's gonna help somebody. So thanks, Greg, for being available again this morning. Sorry about our last minute change in schedule, but that's gonna happen to us occasionally, I think.
Absolutely. And yeah, it was a great morning, and I'll talk to you online soon.
Okay.